Let's begin by understanding how nuclear plants work. Firstly, this is not carbon dioxide, it is actually water vapor. Nuclear plants are like giant fancy steam kettles. It uses the energy released by nuclear fission to heat water into steam and spin turbines. Deep inside the reactor, there are billions of tiny atoms. Within the atom is the nucleus, which is bound together by a very strong force, which has a creative name called the strong force. When bombarded with a neutron, it can be split apart, a process called fission. Uranium is a good element for fission because its atoms are so large and the force that binds the nucleus together becomes weak. As seen here, neutrons collide with uranium atoms in nuclear power plants, splitting them, which releases neutrons from the uranium that in turn collide with other atoms, causing a chain reaction. This chain reaction is controlled with control rods that absorb neutrons. In the core of nuclear reactors, the fission of uranium atoms releases energy that heats water to about 271 degrees Fahrenheit, which is then used to spin turbines that are connected to generators, producing electricity. Despite the use of radioactive fuel, nuclear plants are one of the safest forms of energy production. They are completely different from the nuclear bombs that can decimate whole cities. Since the first reactor made in 1954, 667 nuclear reactors have been made, and of those, only 4 of them, Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, SL1, and Fukushima, have had accidents. The difference between nuclear energy and all other energy sources is that while those sources give off energy at a smaller but continuous stream, nuclear energy creates explosions of heat and energy at once. This means that when something goes wrong it attracts the attention of the whole world, while there are hundreds of smaller hydro dam failures that go unnoticed. Unlike the common belief, nuclear reactor failures do not go off like nuclear bombs. Instead, the main cause is from a fire and the leaking nuclear waste. Even with the thousands of deaths due to nuclear power and even more affected from radiation, nuclear power is by far the safest. From the tens of thousands of people dying prematurely to air pollution created from burning coal, it would take at least 14 years before someone dies of nuclear waste. But just to be safe, don't buy your next house next to a nuclear reactor. Nuclear power plants also create minimal emissions while running. The construction of the plants, the refinement of the uranium required, and the disposal of the waste all emits a significant amount of greenhouse gases, but is still many times lower than conventional gas and coal-powered plants. One of the main concerns with nuclear power is radiation emissions. However, coal plants actually emit 3 times more radioactivity than nuclear power plants. Cost is a major concern for many anti-nuclear supporters. However, nuclear energy is expensive in the short run, but is significantly superior to a natural gas plant in the long run. It does take longer for it to break even, but with the very low cost of fuel compared to the massive amounts of gas required to run a gas plant, it is much better in the long run. It takes longer to break even, but when it does, it's a money-making machine. One uranium fuel pellet the size of a quarter can produce the same amount of energy as 1 ton of coal or half a ton of natural gas. Compared to a gas plant's 25-year life and $321 million profit, a nuclear plant lasts 35 years and produces $5 billion in profit. It is true that other forms of renewables are cheaper than nuclear, but if we can afford to use natural gas, then it being too expensive should not be an excuse. Nuclear reactors can also be built anywhere. It doesn't require places with high winds, lots of sun, or massive rivers, nor does it require thousands of acres of land, which is something that intrigues many countries. A typical 1,000 megawatt nuclear plant takes about 1 square mile to operate, while solar or wind farms of that size would require 75 to 360 times more land, or the equivalent of 430 wind turbines or 3 million solar panels. Nuclear also works at 93% capacity, natural gas at 56, coal at 48, hydro at 40, wind at 35, and solar at 25, which means that nuclear power plants work at full power 93% of the time, while solar power plants only produce full power 25%. But wait, you might be asking, what about the other 75% of the time? Well, these plants all have a backup power source, which runs on, you guessed it, fossil fuels. Finally, we have to look into the future. A lot of the people complain about nuclear power creating a lot of waste, and thankfully, people have an answer to that. Remember how nuclear power creates heat and steam that creates energy and nuclear waste? Well, people have learned that you can take your new fuel, and put it with your old fuel, to create more energy. It has a fancy name called recycling. By making these special nuclear reactors called breeder reactors, nuclear power creates more fuel than it uses up, essentially making nuclear power renewable. People have also been experimenting with nuclear fusion, where you smash 2 atoms together, creating 4 million times more power than coal or gas. Instead of requiring uranium, which is rather hard to find, fusion reactors run on hydrogen, which you can get from water. It's also way safer than fission. requires no radioactive substances, and is environmentally friendly. For people looking into space exploration, nuclear power will be their top choice. With no water, wind, coal, or oil on other planets, and less energy the farther you get from the sun, nuclear power is a must when it comes to space. So our message to you all listening in the audience is that nuclear power isn't all big explosions and destroying cities. One of these giant steam kettles may power your home someday.